Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're talking about revolutionary financial literacy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're going to be going beyond the usual, tips on budgeting and credit scores.
Right.
We're going to explore how financial literacy could be used to understand, maybe even challenge the systems that we live under.
Interesting.
Yeah. Our guide for this deep dive is this article, Revolutionary Financial Literacy. Reclaiming Economics from Exploitation.
Sounds intense.
Yeah. It's definitely some food for thought, for sure.
Yeah, you know what's really striking about this article is how it just like flips the script on how we usually view financial literacy.
Yeah, for sure.
It suggests that the programs that we kind of take for granted, the ones that are supposed to be helping people get out of poverty, might actually be contributing to the problem.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold claim. I mean, the article doesn't hold back at all. It just comes right out and says that mainstream financial literacy programs are actually designed to fail. It's like they're setting people up to just barely scrape by instead of like actually thrive.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these programs focus on individual behavior. Like, oh, you need to budget better, or you need to manage your credit better, always chasing this American dream.
Yeah.
But they totally overlook all of the systemic issues that keep so many people struggling in the first place.
Yeah, it's like they're telling you to climb a ladder when the rungs are spaced way too far apart. You can't reach.
That you can't get a foothold.
Right.
It's impossible.
So it's not about like a lack of effort on the part of the individual. It's the system itself that's making it so hard to get ahead.
Right.
And, the article calls this the digital plantation, which I thought was a really striking term. It's like credit scores and all of this financial surveillance are used to control people, especially those in marginalized groups.
So like a new form of the same systems that were used to exploit people in the past.
Right, exactly, just in a digital form.
Exactly.
And, it's interesting because this makes me think about how the U.S. is always criticizing China's social credit system, but we have similar systems here.
Yeah, but ours are way less transparent.
Right.
Less accountable.
So it makes you think, if these mainstream approaches aren't the answer, what is? And thankfully, the article offers some pretty revolutionary alternatives.
Yeah, they propose like 3 different frameworks: Leninist, Maoist, and Pan-Africanist Marxist.
Wow.
Each with its own unique perspective on financial literacy.
Okay, so these are frameworks that are really rooted in collective action and pushing back against the existing power structures.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm really interested to dive into each of these. Let's start with the Leninist perspective. I'm really curious to see how this applies to financial literacy.
Yeah, so the Leninist framework really zeroes in on understanding how capitalism works, especially this concept of surplus value, which is basically the difference between the value that a worker creates and the wages that they receive.
Okay, so it's like you work at a bakery, you make 100 loaves of bread, they sell for $5 each, but you only get paid like a fraction of that total value.
Exactly. Yeah. That remaining profit goes to the owner. That's the surplus value.
Okay, so in the Leninist framework, financial literacy isn't just about managing your own personal finances. It's about understanding how the entire system generates wealth.
Right.
And then who benefits from that.
Exactly. And this framework really emphasizes the importance of collective power, things like unions, strikes, especially in urban areas where workers are concentrated.
Right. So instead of blaming individuals for their financial struggles, the Leninist approach says, hey, look at the power dynamics here. These are the things that are actually at play. And it encourages workers to band together, to demand a fairer share.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the Maoist framework? How does that differ?
So the Maoist framework is particularly relevant to rural communities. It draws on the experience of the Chinese Revolution, and it really emphasizes economic self-reliance and grassroots mobilization.
Okay, so instead of waiting for someone to come in and fix things for you, you're taking control of your own resources and livelihood.
Exactly.
I'm thinking about things like sustainable agriculture, cooperative farming models.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. The article talks about the Rust Belt.
Yeah.
And how the decline of those areas wasn't just some natural economic shift.
Right.
It argues that it was a result of corporations putting profit over people and over the environment.
Wow. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
So instead of relying on corporations to create jobs, we need to be thinking about how communities can create their own sustainable economies.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got The Leninist framework,
Yeah.
the Maoist framework. Now, how does the Pan-Africanist Marxist approach fit into all of this?
Okay, so the Pan-Africanist Marxist framework really centers on this concept of racial capitalism, which is this idea that racism is like deeply intertwined with capitalism.
Okay.
It recognizes that marginalized communities have been exploited, both historically and in the present.
Okay, so we're talking about how race and class intersect to create and maintain economic inequality. And this isn't just about things that happened in the past. It's about the systems and practices that are still disadvantaging certain groups today.
Exactly. Things like redlining, predatory lending, the legacy of colonialism. These are all things that are still shaping financial systems today.
So it's like bringing the conversation about financial literacy into the context of systemic racism.
Right.
And it's a call to action to actually address these inequalities.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these three really revolutionary frameworks. They're all challenging the status quo in their own way, and it seems like they're all about shifting power dynamics.
Yeah.
But how does this all translate into practical action? What are the specific strategies that these frameworks advocate for?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Let's break down each framework one by one and explore the concrete steps that they propose.
Sounds good.
So let's start with the Leninist perspective. Remember the concept of surplus value that we talked about. So the Leninist approach says that we need to use labor organizing and collective bargaining as tools to reclaim that surplus value.
Okay, so are we talking about joining unions, participating in strikes, using our collective power to negotiate for better wages and working conditions?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that. When workers come together, they have much more leverage than any individual worker could ever have on their own.
Right. So it's like, united we stand, divided we fall.
Right.
It's not just about demanding a bigger slice of the pie. It's about questioning the recipe of the pie itself.
Yeah, it's about challenging the very foundations of the capital system.
So it's not just about working within the system. It's about imagining and building a different system.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does the Maoist framework approach this idea of practical action, especially when we're talking about rural communities?
So the Maoist framework really emphasizes self-reliance and grassroots mobilization.
Okay.
It's about communities taking control of their own destinies.
Okay, so things like worker cooperatives, local food systems, community-owned businesses.
Exactly. It's about fostering economic independence and resilience at the local level.
So it's not about waiting for some outside force to come in and save you.
Right.
You're creating your own solutions.
Yeah, okay.
That's a powerful vision.
It is.
And it makes me think about what the article said about the Rust Belt, that the decline of these areas wasn't inevitable. It was a result of policies that favored corporate interests over the well-being of communities.
Right. And the Maoist framework challenges us to see that. There's often deliberate exploitation at play. It's not just some random force of the market.
Okay, so it's about recognizing that economic policies are choices.
Exactly.
And those choices have consequences.
Especially for marginalized communities.
Okay, so what about the Pan-Africanist Marxist approach? How does it translate these ideas of collective action and economic empowerment into tangible strategies?
So the Pan-Africanist Marxist framework really emphasizes building collective wealth and power within marginalized communities.
Yeah.
It calls for things like mutual aid, reparations, and cooperative economics as ways to address the historical and ongoing effects of racial capitalism.
So it's like centuries of exploitation have left these deep scars, and just playing by the rules of a rigged game isn't going to lead to liberation.
Right.
You have to create your own rules, your own systems of support, your own systems of empowerment.
Exactly. And the article highlights examples like the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program and the Poor People's Campaign as powerful illustrations of this approach.
Those are really inspiring examples. It's a reminder that even in the face of systemic oppression, communities can come together to create alternative systems of care and support.
Yes.
But these movements often face fierce opposition from those in power.
That's true.
So how do we navigate that? How do we build power when the system is actively trying to suppress it?
That's a crucial question. And I think the answer lies in understanding the nature of power itself. Power isn't something that's just given or taken away. It's something that's constantly being negotiated and contested. And one of the most effective ways to challenge power is to expose its mechanisms, to make the invisible visible,
So it's about shining a light on the systems and practices that perpetuate inequality.
Exactly. Whether it's discriminatory lending practices, exploitative labor conditions, or the way that wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few.
When we understand how power operates, we can start to develop strategies to disrupt it.
Right.
And that's where education becomes so important. The
Absolutely.
more people understand how the system works, the more they'll be able to see through the propaganda and recognize the tactics that are being used to divide and disempower them.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention.
Right.
But simply seeing the problem isn't enough. We need to take action to dismantle these systems and create something better.
Absolutely.
And that's where collective action becomes so essential.
Yes.
The article reminds us that we can't achieve liberation through individual effort alone. It requires solidarity, organizing, building power through movements that can challenge the status quo.
Exactly.
It's about remembering that throughout history, social change has always been driven by collective action, by people coming together to demand a more just and equitable world.
And that's a really powerful reminder, especially when it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges we face.
The article doesn't offer any easy solutions, but it does provide a framework for understanding the roots of economic inequality and a call to action to dismantle the systems that perpetuate it.
That's right.
So it's not about finding a magic bullet. It's about embarking on a journey of transformation, a journey that requires both individual growth and collective action. And it starts with reimagining financial literacy as a tool for liberation, not just for navigating a system that's designed to keep us in our place.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our economic power, not just as individuals, but as communities.
And that's a vision worth fighting for.
Absolutely. So you know these frameworks. They offer a powerful critique of the systems that we live under.
Yeah.
But they also give us a path toward a more just and equitable future.
That's what I find so interesting about this whole deep dive. It's not just about pointing out the problems. It's about actually exploring the solutions.
Exactly. And the article goes beyond just theory. It actually delves into some practical steps.
Okay.
It talks about creating this new kind of financial literacy, one that empowers people to challenge the status quo.
So it's like, instead of just learning to play the game, we're learning how to change the rules of the game.
Precisely. And the article highlights these three key elements of this new financial literacy.
Okay.
Education as liberation, collective resistance, and the abolition of exploitative systems.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. Starting with education as liberation, what does that actually look like?
Well, think about it this way. It's about moving beyond those messages that tell us we're poor because of our own bad choices.
Right.
Instead, it's about understanding how the system itself is designed to keep certain groups disadvantaged.
So instead of blaming ourselves for not budgeting well enough, we start to see how things like predatory lending, systemic racism, lack of access to quality education create these barriers that are way bigger than any one individual.
Exactly. It's about understanding things like surplus value, wage labor, racial capitalism, the mechanisms that actually drive economic inequality.
It's like giving people X-ray vision so they can see these hidden structures that are shaping our lives.
Right. And it's not just about seeing the problems. It's about developing those critical thinking skills so we can envision and actually work toward solutions.
So it's not about just complaining about the system. It's about empowering people to actually become agents of change.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second element, collective resistance.
So we've got the knowledge. Now what do we do with it?
Well, the article argues that real change doesn't happen in isolation. It requires collective action, solidarity, and building power through grassroots organizing.
It's that idea that we're all in this together, and that by joining forces, we can amplify our voices and create a more powerful force for change.
Exactly. Think about historical examples, like the Civil Rights Movement or the fight for women's suffrage. Those movements were successful because people came together, organized, and demanded change.
And the article also highlights some more recent examples, too, like the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight for climate justice.
Absolutely. These movements show us how powerful collective action can be. They're challenging the status quo, and they're creating a more just and equitable world.
But these movements often face a lot of opposition, so how do we navigate that? How do we build power when this system is actively trying to suppress it?
Well, that's where education and awareness become even more crucial. The more people understand how power operates, the more they'll be able to recognize and resist the tactics used to divide and disempower them.
It's like once you see the matrix, you can start to see the code. and you can begin to hack it.
Exactly.
And that awareness can be so empowering.
It can help people move beyond those feelings of helplessness and channel their energy into collective action.
So knowledge is power, but it's not enough on its own. We need to combine that knowledge with collective action.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the third element, and maybe the most radical one, the abolition of exploitative systems.
Okay, so now we're getting to the heart of the matter. What does it actually mean to abolish these systems? Like, where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with recognizing that these systems aren't just flawed. They're fundamentally designed to maintain inequality.
Okay.
So we can't just tweak things around the edges. We need to actually envision a world where these systems no longer exist.
So it's not about making capitalism more humane. It's about creating something entirely different.
Exactly. And the article points to things like worker cooperatives, community land trusts, and alternative currencies as building blocks for a new economy, one that prioritizes people and the planet over profit.
These are some pretty radical ideas. Do you think they stand a chance?
It's hard to say, but I think the main point of the article is that we can't limit ourselves to what seems politically feasible right now. We need to be bold in our demands and our visions for the future.
It's like we need to shift the Overton window, expand the realm of what's considered possible.
Precisely. And that's where I think the power of storytelling comes in.
Okay.
We need to create new narratives that can paint a compelling picture of a world without exploitation and oppression.
So it's not just about facts and figures. It's about appealing to people's hearts and imaginations.
Exactly. We need to inspire people to believe that a better world is possible and that they can be a part of creating it.
That's a really powerful idea. But stories alone aren't going to change the world. We need to translate those stories into concrete actions.
Absolutely. And the article actually offers a range of practical strategies for doing just that.
Okay, like what?
Well, it talks about things like supporting worker-owned businesses, divesting from corporations that are causing harm, and advocating for policies that promote economic justice.
So it's about aligning our everyday actions with our values and using our economic power to support a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that every dollar we spend, every investment we make, is a vote for the kind of world we want to live in.
This is all really inspiring, but I have to admit, it's kind of a lot to take in. Where do we even begin to put all of this into practice?
That's a valid feeling. And the article acknowledges just how big this task is.
Right.
But it reminds us that we don't have to do everything all at once.
Okay.
We can start small with whatever we have, wherever we are.
So it's about taking those small steps, those everyday acts of resistance, and building momentum from there.
Exactly. And I think that's where the article's emphasis on education comes full circle.
Okay.
Because the more we learn about these systems, the more opportunities we'll see to challenge them in our own lives.
So it's like once you see the matrix,
you
start to see glitches everywhere.
Precisely. And those glitches are where the seeds of transformation are planted.
That's a really powerful image. So it's not about waiting for some grand revolution. It's about recognizing that the revolution is happening all around us in those small acts of defiance, in the moments of solidarity, in the spaces where we dare to imagine and create something different.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it, and a message that offers a lot of hope and inspiration, especially in a time when it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by all the challenges we face.
Yeah, it's like you said, we've been conditioned to just accept the system as it is. Like, it's the only option.
Exactly. And that's why I think this deep dive is so important. You know, this article poses this really crucial question. Can we reimagine financial literacy, not as a means of assimilation, but as a means of liberation?
Yeah.
It's not about just surviving within a system that might be working against us. It's about understanding those systems and then challenging them to create something better.
It is a big question, and it can be a bit overwhelming. I mean, what was the biggest takeaway for you?
For me, it's this sense of possibility. You know, the article doesn't just critique the system. It gives us a vision. It gives us a roadmap for how we can build a more equitable future.
I agree with that. It can be really easy to get caught up in all the negativity. But this conversation, this article, reminds us that there are people out there already working towards these goals. They're building alternative systems, creating new narratives, challenging the status quo.
It's that collective action that gives me hope. Remember the examples we talked about?
Yeah.
The Black Panther Party, the Poor People's Campaign, all these movements for workers' rights, environmental justice, these are all examples of people coming together to demand a better world.
Right. It shows us that we're not alone. So where do we go from here? What can our listeners do to actually join this movement?
Well, I think the first step is to keep learning. Read books, listen to podcasts, connect with organizations that are doing this work. The more you understand about these systems, the better equipped you'll be to challenge them.
It's about being a more conscious consumer, too. Supporting businesses that align with your values, divesting from those that don't.
Exactly.
Being mindful of how our choices impact the world.
Every dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of world we want to live in.
I love that. And, you know, we shouldn't underestimate the power of conversation.
Oh, for sure.
Talking to your friends, your family, your colleagues about these issues.
Right. The more we can normalize these conversations, the more we can shift the collective consciousness.
It's about planting those seeds, sparking those aha moments, and building a movement one conversation at a time.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. I think it's a powerful reminder that financial literacy isn't just about personal finances. It's about understanding the forces that shape our world and working together to create a more just and equitable future.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring these concepts. What does a truly equitable financial system look like to you? How can you use your knowledge and your resources to contribute to this movement? The journey towards financial liberation starts with each of us. Until next time, keep diving deep.